Welcome back once again, friends. In this video, we shall get started with the pixel art project on Turtle graphics. What we are going to do in this video is that we will create functions to first draw a line, and next we'll use that function to draw and to create another function to draw a rectangle. Now you might wonder that the basic unit of my pixel art is going to be a square. As you can see, for example, in this Mario diagram, I'm essentially putting together a lot of squares. So why is it that I'm creating a function to draw a rectangle? The reason is really very simple, because if you think about it, square is just a specialized rectangle. In fact, square is also a rectangle, just that its sides are all equal, right? So if I can create a function to say draw rectangle, then I can call it in a special way to give me a square. So that's the idea. Now let's get started. So as you may know, that to define a function we have to use what is called the def keyword. So in this video we're going to see how we do that in the right way, right? So for this purpose I have created a ripple with turtle. So this is Python with turtle, and by doing the first two commands, which are the import turtle, t equals to turtle dot turtle, with these two brackets, I get this turtle which is waiting for me to give it commands. Right now the turtle is standing on the coordinate 0 0, but let's say I wanted to draw a line, so I can say t dot go to, say for example 0 0, and then I can also go and say t dot go to, for instance, you know here these are maybe if I say, for example, 100 100, right? Now if I did this, I'm going to get a line from 0 0 to 100 100. Remember, 100 in the x direction, 100 in the y direction, so I end up on this corner. And by default the pen is always down for the turtle, so that's why I get this a line getting created, right? Now I can draw one more line, for example, and I can go and say this time round, say go and say pen up, uh, you know and then I say t dot say go to, maybe I go and send it to 100 minus 100, so send it all the way down, and then say t dot pen down, and I say t dot go to, for example in this case minus 100, and say 20, right? So I expect a diagonal line coming up here. The coordinates don't matter, but all I want to show is that with this code I get, for example, first line because of these two, and then I get one more line from this 100 minus 100 to minus 120. Now because the grid is not available to us on the stage, it may take a little bit of time to get used to, but it's just practice. You'll understand all these coordinates much better as you practice more and more. However, notice that let's say I have a situation where I have to draw a lot of lines one after the other, right? So you may wonder for the first time that it's okay, no problem, I can keep repeating this code. It's just that I have to go and find out which x and y I have to go, and so on and so forth, right? But a more convenient method would be that I can create what I call a function, so that I just call that function and that draws me that line, right? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So we have a situation here where there's a piece of code we want to use again and again, but that piece of code is not available, let's say, in ready-made for us to use, right? So for that purpose we can define a function, and in fact what we want to do through this function is that we want to just have it draw a line from any given x0 y0 to any given x1 y1, right? So I'll do that right now. So I call it a def, and I say draw line, and notice I'm just going to give it x0 x0 y0, it's my initial point, and to say x1 y1, right? And I can in fact so I need to give a colon over here. If I do this, then I can give a comment as well, draw a line from x, say x0 y0 to say x1 y1, right? Now this comment will obviously get ignored, but I must give the real code. So what I want to do is to do say t dot pen up, uh, pen up. Then I come in here and say t dot go to, say in this case I'll do x0 y0, because remember that's what I want to do, go to the first point. Then I put the pen down because I do not want any extra lines and stuff to come in, so I put a pen down after reaching the first point. So I do the pen down, and then I go and say t dot go to, say x1 y1, right? Now this completes my function, and I'm going to get rid of all of this, because really now I have got a function available to me which is very general, which can help me to draw a line from any x0 y0 to any x1 y1. And to do that, all I have to do really is to say draw draw line, say for example 0 0, and say 100, 100, right? So when my interpreter sees this, first, when my interpreter sees the def command, it knows that there's a function over here. Next, when I use this function, interpreter knows that this function had 4 inputs and I'm giving 4 inputs. So it's just going to map my inputs to, for example, x0 will be treated as 0, y0 as 0, x1 as 100, y1 as 100. So it's going to do t dot go to, in this case, 0, 0. Put the pen down, t dot go to 100, 100. And I'll get one line from 0, 0 to 100, 100, right, as I expected. Right? I can do this again. So for example, let's say I say Control C and Control V again. I say I draw a line between, let's say, minus 100 to say minus 100, 100 minus 100, let's say, right? So again, in this case, x0 will be minus 100, y0 will be 0, x1 will be 100, and y1 will be minus 100, and this code will get executed as expected. And I'll get, this time around, I expected to get 2 lines. So if I run this, I get the first line and then I get the second line, right? Notice how much more convenient it has become for us to call this function and to draw any number of lines on this code. Now, before I move on from this point, I just want to spend some time on discussing the syntax of this function creation, because for many of you, this could be the very first time you're creating a function in Python. So let's look at this very carefully. In fact, I'm going to highlight 5 points which you must keep in mind when you're defining your own functions. First thing first, notice that function definition always starts with the keyword def. So I'm using this keyword def, which tells the interpreter that, hey, look, now there's a function being defined and I must treat the subsequent code as such. Next, I give name to a function. Now I can pretty much give any name, but as it makes, as it's logical, we should give a name that makes sense. For example, here this function draws a line, and hence we have called this draw line. Next, this is the third point, is that I have got inputs here. Now I can have any number of inputs. So these are the inputs that are being provided to the function. You can call them arguments, also parameters. But really, this is what we are calling the function with. This is what we are passing to the function. I can have any number separated by a comma, but notice that I must put these inside a closed bracket. I mean, inside the circular bracket, right? So I put a bracket, I put all the arguments that I want to, and then I close these brackets to define my inputs. And notice wherever I call this function, again, I have to put these brackets, and we already saw how these inputs get mapped. Point number 4 about a function is that I must have a colon over here. So in the same line, it's def, function name, arguments, then a colon. Now this is part of the syntax, and after this, whatever comes is part of the function. But notice very, very importantly, and this point number 5 about the functions, very important, is that all the lines that are part of this function have been indented from the base. So just like in the loops, we are using indentation again in Python to demarcate logical statements, right? So when this interpreter sees this def command and it's nicely done, let's say with the colon and everything, it knows that next few lines are forming this function. So it looks for this indentation. Now, the moment this indentation stops, the function also stops. That's why this draw line is no longer, when I'm calling this draw line, it is no longer a part of this function, right? So the 5th point here is indentation, and that's actually very important because that is how Python logically arranges statements, right? So make sure your function that you define has all of this done, and then it will be fine. Now, again, before moving forward, because this could be the first time for many of you, let us see some things that can go wrong with this. So I'm going to show you exactly 4 errors. So I'm just going to remove this for the moment. So just one line. Let's say if I do everything correctly, I get one line from 0, 0, 100, 100. But let's say the first mistake that can happen is that I can give it one input or say 2 inputs less, right? So let's say I say 0, 0, 100. Now I'm going to get an error because the function that has been defined expects 4 inputs to be provided, but I'm providing only 3 inputs, right? So if I were to run this right now, I'm going to get an error, rather serious looking error. The REPL process died. But remember, if you just go one line, it just says draw line missing one required positional argument y1. Because remember, all that's going on is that we are giving 4 arguments. The function accepts them and assigns them to x0, y0, x1, y1 respectively. However, since this time we forgot to give y1, the interpreter did not know what to do. Similarly, let's say I made a mistake and I said go to 100, 100, and let's say I had added an extra 10, right? Now this time round, function wanted 4 inputs, but we are giving it 5 inputs. Again, we are going to end up in an error, and here it tells us very clearly draw line takes 4 positional arguments, but 5 were given, right? So once again, this is an error. The next error is a little bit more interesting, perhaps, or a little bit more, let's say, easy to make, which is that, say, I call this function draw line before I have defined this. Say I call this draw line, but before I've defined the function, again, I'm going to get into an error because what's going to happen is that, so now when I run this statement, notice I get an error. Again, there's an error, and this time it says name draw line is not defined. And again, this should not surprise us because what's really happening, as I told you earlier, the code runs from top to bottom. So when the interpreter encounters draw line, till now it doesn't know what is the meaning of draw line, because draw line, remember, is not a built-in function, so it doesn't understand that, and it has not yet encountered our definition. So which means that whenever we call a function, we must make sure that the function has been defined before we call it, like here. So if I did this, now everything should run fine and I should get a line as expected, right? Now finally, one more error, and this is quite interesting as well. Some students tend to do, in this case, since we are dealing with turtle, they might do t dot draw line. Right now, again, this will cause a problem because remember, when I call t dot something, basically I'm looking for methods or attributes which are part of the turtle object, right? Remember, t is like a turtle instance of turtle. This function here is not a method of turtle itself. This is in fact a user defined method not associated with the turtle class, right? So that's why we do not have to do t dot draw line. In fact, all we have to do is to say draw line 0 0, say 100. I mean, again, the inputs don't matter so long as we give 4 inputs, which makes sense for this particular usage to happen. Now we have said a lot of things, but let's just take a down the memory lane type of trip back into Scratch. We have in fact encountered this problem of drawing a line in a program again and again using a my block in the pen platformer. Right now, in case you have not seen this, I urge you to go back to this project because the logic we are using is in fact very similar, and the process of defining this draw line function is also very similar. So you may recall we had a function called draw line from x0 y0 to x1 y1, and the way we did this was to go to my blocks and say make a block. So I can, in this case, I'm just going to say edit, and we used to get an interface like this where we mentioned inputs and some labels and say when we created this, then we had to define what this block does, right? So if you really think about it, what we are doing in Python is actually quite similar, just that this entire process of make a block gets done to the def command, and this definition then we do as part of the code, right? So it's really, really very similar. In fact, keeping up with this similarity, we will now in Python create a function which draws us a rectangle by using the exact same logic as this. Notice just in Scratch, we could use the existing my blocks to be part of the new my blocks. So in Scratch, in Python also, we are going to use the function draw line inside this function called draw rectangle, and the logic here is quite straightforward, but I'll just remind you, in case you might have forgotten this. So the logic here is really that we are going to draw 4 lines over here. So first line from x0 y0 to x0 plus length y0, x0 plus length y0 plus height, x0 y0 plus x0 y0 plus height, and then fourth line back to x0 y0. In fact, we are going to write the exact same logic. So in case somebody is getting a little bit confused about this logic, I recommend you to go back to the pen platformer videos from Scratch days and look at those, because there we go deeper into how this whole logic works, right? But for now, we can go back to our Python code, and we can start writing, let's say we can start writing now a function which draws us a rectangle, and that's it's not hard again. So I'm going to once again use the def command, and I say draw, say, a rectangle. Okay, I have to be careful, draw a rectangle, and this time around I'm going to give 4 inputs, which are namely x0 y0, the starting point, the length, and the height, right, hgt. So now notice these are my inputs. Again, I put them in brackets. I must put a colon over here. That's part of the syntax. And then I can notice my cursor has already got indented because indentation is important to define a function. And here I say draw a rectangle at, say, x0 y0 of length, say, len, and height hgt, right? Now I can start doing this by basically drawing 4 lines. So what I do is that I just go and say draw line. For example, here I start from x0 y0, x0 plus len y0. Remember, first I draw the sleeping line, Then I draw the next line, which is draw line, say x0 plus len y0 to x0 plus len y0 plus hgt. So that's the second line. I go vertically upwards. Then I come back. So I again go draw a line. This time round it's going to be x0 plus len y0 plus hgt, x0 because I come back and I say y0 plus hgt. Next I draw one more line, so I say draw line, and this will be from x0 y0 plus hgt x0 y0. Notice I come back to the same point. Now do this carefully, do this slowly. This is not hard, but this requires a little bit of thinking, and like I said, go back to the scratch days to understand how this logic has been set up. So now that this function has been defined, I can in fact call it, say, draw a rectangle, and I can say, for example, 0 0, say maybe 10 and 100. So if I do this, I expect to see a rectangle of length 10, height 100, and that's exactly what I do here, right? I get this rectangle which is of length 10 and height 100. Of course, I can keep doing this now. Let's say I do one more of this. I'll this time round I'll go and say at say minus 20, and say maybe of length 20 and height probably say 40, right? Again, these are just now inputs. So my block, I mean my function is going to do the job for me. It's just going to create a rectangle wherever I want. Now there are three things I want to highlight at this point of time. One is that in our pixel art, in fact, we are going to use filled up rectangles, actually filled up squares. So first thing, let's see how we are going to fill up this whole shape, right? That's actually very simple. What we can do is that we can give our my block another input called color. Right now, this time color has to be a string. So when I, for example, call this my rectangle, I can say call it say red here, and I can just maybe put this in space in quotations. Then maybe I can say call it pink, and I can draw, let's just do this. Now, before I can use this in this way, I must make sure I provide the um, right kind of input. So I'm going to say t dot fill color uh, to color, because again remember I'm going to pass red to this function. For example, here it's going to say t dot fill color red, but that's not sufficient. I must do t dot begin fill, and we have seen these commands before. And over here I just go and say t dot end fill. Now I must make sure, like I said, that all these commands are indented at the right level, and that's one level more than the definition, right? So that the function definition becomes correct. It knows that draw rectangle extends all the way till here, right? Now if I run this code right now, I'm going to get, okay, so I get okay, so I got an error here because, okay, so I've made a mistake here because it should be length, height, and then color, right? So I mean, basically it was 4 arguments, but I have given 5, right? So that was a mistake here. I accidentally removed color from there. So if I did this now, notice I get one red rectangle, one pink rectangle. In fact, I can get any number of rectangles from this. If I want to get a square, right, it's very simple, because remember, rectangle is just a special case of rather square is just a special case of a rectangle. Let me just put this at say something like minus 100, say minus 100 and minus say 20. If I make the length and height equal, for example 20 20, and this time let's say I fill it in say green color, I can again get I can run this and I expect to get a square. So it draws those two. Notice I get a nice square coming up, right? Because rectangle with equal sides, in this case length and height both are 20, it becomes a square. Now, before I wrap this up, I just want to highlight one thing. If you look at my previous set of videos where I talk about drawing a square, I also mentioned that this is just one of the many methods of doing a square. In fact, some students prefer to use the move forward and turn method. That's also fine. You can also wrap that code inside a my block so that you have a my block which draws a rectangle for you, fills it up. How this code happens is not all that important as far as we are concerned right now, so long as we end up with a my block which allows us to draw this square, because we are going to use this for the subsequent portions, right? So if you want to use forward and turning methods, please go ahead and do that. That's not a problem at all. I hope you found this useful. I hope you learned how to define a function through this. We'll be happy to hear your comments, thoughts, feedback on this video, as well as anything else. Please let me know. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.